Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to lose everything all at once? What if in the blink of an eye, your world changed and you found yourself with no way out? Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the pale yellow walls of her bedroom. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly alive. Every day seemed to blur into the next, an endless cycle of waiting, hoping, and fighting the inevitable. But the truth was, the battle was slipping through her fingers faster than she could hold on to it. At just 23, she had dreams that she had never gotten the chance to live out. She wanted to travel the world, see Paris at sunset, and dance in the quay, rain in New York City. She dreamed of finding true love, of having a family, and of growing old with someone who would stand by her side no matter what. But now, sitting here in this quiet room, Emily knew that time was running out. Her doctor had been blunt, too blunt perhaps, but his words echoed in her mind. Your condition is terminal. We don't have much time left. Cancer. The word sounded so simple, so small compared to the world-shattering impact it had on her life. It wasn't the diagnosis that crushed her, it was the knowledge that her clock was ticking. Every second that passed felt like a reminder of how little time she had. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the small journal she kept beside her bed. She had started writing in it when she first received the news. At first, it had been a way to document her journey, to put her thoughts into words, to make sense of it all. But now it felt like a countdown to, what? An end? Or perhaps a new beginning? Her mind wandered back to the day she first felt the lump. It had been a random Tuesday morning, the kind where nothing special seemed to happen, but that was the moment everything changed. From that day forward, her life had been marked by hospital visits, scans, treatments, and endless questions. Questions that no one seemed to have the answers to. And the hardest question of all, why me? Emily sighed deeply and wiped away the tears that had unknowingly slipped down her cheek. It wasn't that she was scared of dying, it was that she hadn't truly lived yet. And now, it was too late to chase her dreams. As the sun dipped below, the horizon outside her window, she felt the weight of her own isolation. She had tried to hide her pain from her family and friends, pretending like everything was fine, but it wasn't. They had no idea what she was going through, what it felt like to be trapped inside her own body, to watch as the world moved on, while she stayed stuck in place. But then something unexpected happened. Emily's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen, Keanu Reeves. Her thumb hovered over the screen. No way. This couldn't be real. But it was. Keanu had been the face of many of Emily's dreams. She had admired him for as long as she could remember, not just for his acting, but for the kindness he seemed to exude in everything he did. It wasn't every day that someone like Keanu Reeves reached out to someone like her. Her fingers shook as she answered the call. The screen lit up with his familiar face, looking as calm and kind as ever. "Hi, Emily, it's Keanu," he said with a warm smile that instantly made her feel at ease. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." The sound of his voice, so calm, so grounded, made her feel like she was dreaming. For a moment she forgot about the pain, the uncertainty, and the heavy weight of her illness. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. All she could do was stare at him in disbelief. This wasn't real, it couldn't be. Keanu chuckled softly, sensing her hesitation. "I know this is a little unexpected. I just heard your story, and I wanted to reach out. How are you holding up?" Emily finally found her voice, though it was shaky. I don't even know what to say. This is unreal." He smiled, leaning slightly into the screen. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I'm here for you. You're not alone in this." For the first time in months, Emily felt a flicker of hope. There was something about his presence that made everything feel just a little more bearable, like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. Keanu continued, "I know this is a tough time, but if there's anything I can do, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out." Emily's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. These weren't tears of fear or sadness, they were tears of gratitude. She felt seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't have to care but chose to. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Keanu nodded gently. "You matter, Emily. More than you know." For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to believe that there was still something to fight for, that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. As their conversation continued, she found herself laughing even in the midst of the storm. She hadn't laughed in a long time. Not like this. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Emily sat on her couch, her phone still in her hand, staring at the screen where Keanu's face had just disappeared after their video call. She couldn't quite process what had just happened. Was that really him? The Keanu Reeves? The actor she had admired for years, who had reached out to her personally, who had made her feel for a brief moment like she wasn't just a diagnosis, but a person. But then the weight of reality came crashing back. The call was over. The smile on her face faded. She placed the phone on the table, running her hands over her tired eyes, feeling the exhaustion in her bones. There was no denying it. Her condition was worsening. Every passing day felt like another battle, a battle she wasn't sure she could win. But even though the day-to-day felt like a constant uphill struggle, she tried to keep up appearances. She had always been good at hiding how she truly felt. Her family didn't need to know the extent of what she was going through. She didn't want to burden them. They had their own lives to live, after all, and Emily was determined to protect them from the pain she was enduring. Still, it was impossible to ignore the fear that gnawed at her from within. How much longer did she have? She couldn't bear the thought of her family watching her fade away, seeing the vibrant girl they once knew become a shell of herself. So she did her best to keep up with the routines, to smile when her friends visited, to tell them she was doing okay. But the truth was, Emily was barely holding it together. The following week passed in a blur of medical appointments and treatments that only seemed to drain her more. The pain was becoming harder to manage, and her energy was fleeting. She felt herself slipping away physically and emotionally, and no matter how hard she tried to hold on to the pieces of her life that still made her feel normal, they were slipping through her fingers. Her friends, well-meaning as they were, continued to invite her out for coffee, or to a movie night, or even to just get some fresh air. And Emily would go along, plastering a smile on her face, pretending that everything was fine. But deep down she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that they didn't really understand. No one did. And then there was the phone call from her mother. "Sweetheart, are you sure you're okay? You haven't been answering my texts, and I know things have been tough lately." Her mum's voice crackled over the line. Emily took a deep breath, fighting back the lump that had risen in her throat. "I'm fine, Mum. Just tired." That's all, but she knew it wasn't true. She wasn't just tired. She was exhausted in every sense of the word, mentally, emotionally, and physically. "I'm coming to visit this weekend," her mom continued. "We'll make dinner. Maybe you can bring a friend or two just so we can have a little fun. We can't let you stay cooped up in that apartment all day." Emily's heart clenched. She didn't want to disappoint her mother, but the thought of pretending everything was okay around her family was becoming unbearable. She couldn't keep up the act forever, but she couldn't say no either. Her mom would never understand. It wasn't that Emily didn't love her. She did, more than anything. But it was hard for her to accept how much things had changed. "Yeah. Sounds good, Mom," Emily replied, forcing her voice to sound cheerful. "I'll let you know what time works for me." After hanging up, Emily sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the walls around her. She had tried so hard to maintain her composure, but it was becoming impossible. She was falling apart in front of everyone, and no one even knew it. The isolation was suffocating. The feeling of being trapped inside her own body, knowing she was running out of time, was unbearable. The next few days were no better. Emily found herself drifting through life in a haze, not really engaging with anyone or anything. Her friends had started to notice the change, though. They could see that she wasn't herself, but Emily kept them at arm's length. She didn't want them to pity her. She didn't want them to see her weakness. But one afternoon, as she was sitting in a coffee shop, staring blankly at her phone, a familiar face appeared at the door. Keanu. She blinked, unsure if she was seeing things, but no, it was really him. He was standing in the doorway, looking just as calm and kind as he had during their video call. He caught her eye, and a small, reassuring smile spread across his face. "Hey," he said softly, walking over to her table. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Emily stood up in shock, unsure of how to respond. She was still trying to process the fact that the man she had admired for years, the one who had reached out to her when she was at her lowest, was now standing in front of her, in the middle of a coffee shop, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't expect to see you here," she stammered. Keanu chuckled, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. "I know, it's a little unexpected. I just thought maybe we could have a real conversation, outside of the phone and the camera." Emily swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. But in that moment, it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. Here was someone who didn't need to be here, but chose to be. I don't know what to say," she finally whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied gently. "I just want you to know, no matter what, you're not alone in this. I know it's tough, but sometimes just having someone to talk to can make all the difference." It was as though a dam had broken inside her. Emily finally allowed herself to breathe, to let down the walls she had been building around herself. She didn't have to pretend anymore, not with him, not here. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It had been days since Keanu's unexpected visit. Emily still couldn't believe it happened, though she replayed every moment in her mind almost like it was a dream. His presence, his words, everything had felt so surreal. For the first time in ages, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than this relentless cycle of pain and helplessness. But the moment the euphoria began to fade, the harsh reality crept back in. She was still sick. She was still running out of time. And despite the kindness that Keanu had shown her, the weight of her illness was something no one, not even him, could fix. That night, after a long day filled with treatments and endless tests, Emily sat in her apartment staring at the blank wall in front of her. She had taken Keanu's words to heart, but the nagging feeling of impending doom lingered, refusing to leave her alone. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the act. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. She grabbed it, hoping it was Keanu, but instead it was a text from her best friend Sarah. "Hey, I'm coming over tomorrow. You up for some company?" Emily hesitated. She wasn't sure she had the energy to put on a mask again, to pretend she was okay. But at the same time, she didn't want to push Sarah away. She had always been there for her, even when Emily hadn't known how to ask for help. "Sure." "Come over around noon?" Emily typed back, the reply coming almost immediately. "See? You then. Can't wait to catch up." When Sarah arrived the next day, she found Emily sitting on the couch staring out the window. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm, golden light across the room. She looked peaceful, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes, something that Sarah could sense immediately. "Hey, Em," Sarah said, sitting down beside her. "How's everything going?" Emily sighed, shaking her head. It's getting harder, Sarah. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going like this." Sarah's eyes softened, but she didn't push her friend. She knew Emily well, enough to know that when she said things like that, it wasn't just the illness talking. It was the weight of everything that came with it. The isolation, the fear, the grief of knowing she would never get to live out her dreams. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I hate seeing you go through this. It's not fair." Emily leaned her head back against the couch, closing her eyes. "I know, but it's the reality. I can't change it." The two sat in silence for a while, the only sound coming from the distant hum of traffic outside. Emily didn't mind the silence. It was comforting, in a way. But soon, Sarah broke. Her voice tinged with concern. "You know, Emily, I've been thinking about what you told me the other day, about Keanu Reeves reaching out to you." Emily blinked, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "What about it?" "Don't you think that's kind of strange?" Sarah asked gently. I mean, I get that he's famous and all, but why would he go out of his way to contact you? I mean, what's his motivation? Emily froze. The question hadn't crossed her mind before. In all the excitement of having Keanu show interest in her story, she hadn't once stopped to consider the reason behind it. Why him? Why her? She shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I don't know, she admitted. I guess I didn't really think about it. I felt seen, you know? Like for once, someone understood. Sarah nodded slowly, but her eyes narrowed as if she was trying to piece something together. But it's not like celebrities just reach out to random people, Emily. It's not like him to just— Stop, Emily interrupted, her voice trembling. Please, I'm not trying to overthink it. He's just trying to be kind. I get that, Sarah said, her voice softening, but you have to admit it's a little too perfect, right? Maybe it's not just about you. Maybe there's more going on here. The words hung in the air, the weight of them heavy on Emily's chest. Could there be more to this than she realized? Could Keanu's sudden outreach have another, deeper meaning? The questions were starting to gnaw at her, but she pushed them aside, telling herself that Sarah was just being paranoid. After all, Keanu was a good person. He was just trying to help. But as the evening wore on, Emily found herself replaying Sarah's words over and over again in her head. What if there was something more to this? What if she had missed a piece of the puzzle? The next day, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The moment she opened her eyes, the nagging thoughts returned. She had to know more. She had to understand why Keanu had reached out. So she decided to do something she never thought she would do. She started researching. She Googled his name, searching for news stories, interviews, anything that could give her a clue. And then she found it. A charity event. A cause he had been passionate about for years. A foundation dedicated to helping people who had been diagnosed with terminal illnesses. It wasn't the first time he had reached out to someone in a similar situation, but something about the way the articles described his involvement hit her like a ton of bricks. Keanu wasn't just a celebrity trying to help. He was part of something much bigger, something that was deeply personal to him, a cause that wasn't just about saving people, but about connecting with them on a level that few could understand. Emily sank back into her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the weight of it all, the realization that Keanu's kindness wasn't just because he felt sorry for her, it was because he had a personal connection to what she was going through. She stared at the screen, her mind spinning with the new understanding. Could it be that his outreach wasn't just an act of kindness? Was there something more, something she wasn't yet ready to face? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following Emily's discovery were filled with a new kind of unease, a strange combination of curiosity and disbelief. The more she thought about Keanu's charity work and the connections he had with others facing terminal illnesses, the more she wondered if her encounter with him had been part of a larger, intentional plan. Was it fate, or was this just another chapter in the strange, unpredictable story of her life? It had been 2 days since Emily found out about Keanu's involvement with people in similar situations, and yet she couldn't stop turning over the information in her mind. She found herself Googling the foundation he worked with, reading articles and watching interviews, trying to find answers to questions that she had never thought to ask before. Despite her best efforts to maintain her usual routine, doctors, appointments, quiet nights at home, something felt different. There was an undercurrent of anticipation, an almost electric hum of uncertainty that tugged at her every thought. She was unsure whether this was a blessing or a burden, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like her world wasn't shrinking. Instead, it was opening up slowly, cautiously, like a door creaking open after years of being locked shut. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her phone. She had been expecting a message, though she had no idea from whom. The screen lit up with a message from Keanu himself. "Hey, Emily. I was thinking about our conversation the other day. If you're up for it, I'd love to meet up again. Maybe. Talk some more, just the two of us. No pressure, though. Just let me know if you're interested." Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a casual message, it felt like an invitation, one she couldn't ignore. But as she read and reread the words, Emily hesitated. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to dive deeper into whatever connection this was? She had only just begun to process everything, and now here was Keanu offering another chance to talk, to be seen. Her mind raced. What if this is exactly what I need? What if this is my chance to really understand what's going on here? Emily thought back to Sarah's earlier concerns, to the questions her best friend had asked. Was Keanu's kindness truly just an act, or was there something more beneath the surface? And what about Emily's own feelings? Could she let herself trust someone, especially someone like him, again? She hadn't even allowed herself to process the emotions that had come with his first message, let alone the possibility of a deeper connection. A sense of longing tugged at her heart, urging her to take the leap. There was something about Keanu's presence, his calm demeanor, his kindness, that made her feel at peace in a way she hadn't felt in months. She could almost imagine a different future, one where she wasn't just a patient, a person reduced to a diagnosis. A future where she was valued for who she was, where she could be seen, truly seen, for the person she was meant to be. Maybe it's time to stop holding back. Maybe it's time to step into the unknown. Emily took a deep breath and typed out her response. I'd like that, Keanu. I think it's time to talk, to really talk. Within seconds, she received a reply. It was simple but reassuring. Great. Let's meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll text you the details. Looking forward to it. The words seemed to spark something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe this would be the beginning of something new, something unexpected, but full of potential. Maybe this was the start of finding a path she hadn't even known existed. The next day arrived quickly. Emily could barely sit still. She spent hours getting ready, picking out an outfit she felt comfortable in, but still a little more put together than usual. She wanted to feel confident, like she wasn't just a woman who was sick. She wanted to feel alive, to step into this meeting with an open heart. At 2:30 she checked her phone. Keanu's message had come through with the location and time. She set out to meet him at a quiet cafe near the park, a place she had never been but where she hoped she could be herself, away from the eyes of people who didn't truly know her. When Emily arrived, the cafe was mostly empty, save for a few people working on laptops and a couple chatting quietly in the corner. The air smelled of fresh coffee, and the low hum of conversation seemed oddly comforting. She found a table near the window, the perfect spot to observe the outside world. She was early, but the anticipation made her heart race. At exactly 3 p.m., Emily saw him. Keanu entered the cafe, his familiar face glowing with a gentle smile. He scanned the room briefly before his eyes landed on her, and he made his way over, his steps purposeful but unhurried. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, looking effortlessly casual yet somehow more approachable than she could have imagined. "Hey, Emily," he greeted her softly, taking a seat across from her without hesitation. His calm presence immediately put her at ease, and for the first time in days Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Hi," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Thanks for meeting me. I wasn't sure what to expect." Keanu smiled warmly. "I get it. Sometimes it's hard to know where things are going, but I'm glad we're here. I know this might seem a bit out of the blue, but I felt like we had a connection the other day. I wanted to hear more about what you're going through, if you're comfortable sharing." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the lump in her throat. It wasn't that she hadn't wanted to talk. She had wanted to for so long. But she had always been afraid of what people would think, afraid of opening up and showing her vulnerability. But sitting across from Keanu, with his open expression and quiet kindness, it didn't feel as scary anymore. She felt like she was being given a chance, not just to talk, but to be heard. "I don't really know where to start," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe this is a good place. Maybe it's time I let myself be real with someone." Keanu nodded, his gaze soft and patient. "Whenever you're ready, Emily, take your time." And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt the weight of her fear lifting. She was ready to take the next step. She was ready to face the truth. Not just about her illness, but about herself. And maybe, just maybe, this conversation would be the turning point she needed. The cafe was a quiet sanctuary, a space where the noise of the outside world felt miles away. Emily sat across from Keanu, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had come here, expecting maybe a few words of kindness, maybe some advice, but what she hadn't expected was how deeply her encounter with him would start to shift her perspective. Keanu sat back in his chair, his warm eyes never leaving hers, as if he was waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to decide how much of herself she wanted to reveal. She didn't know where to start. The weight of her illness, the loneliness. She had carried for so long the fear of the future. How could she sum it all up? She took a deep breath, glancing down at her hands, which were nervously clasped together on the table. "I guess I should start by saying that I'm not like most people," Emily began, her voice trembling slightly. "Not in the way you might think, though. I'm sick. I've been sick for a while, and lately it feels like I'm running out of time." Keanu didn't say anything, but she noticed the way his expression softened. His eyes were full of empathy, understanding, and something else, something that made her feel like she wasn't alone in this conversation. She had expected pity, but what she found in Keanu's gaze was something far more profound. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and continued, "I've been fighting this illness for so long, and honestly, I don't know how much longer I have. The doctors say there's not much they can do, so I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to make peace with it, how to accept that this might be it for me." Keanu leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Emily, I can't pretend to understand exactly what you're going through, but what I do know is that even in the darkest of times, there's something incredibly powerful in how we choose to live the moments we have left. It's not about the length of time, but what we do with it." Emily looked up, meeting his gaze. The sincerity in his words made something inside her shift. She had been so focused on the countdown of her life, so consumed with the idea that time was running out, that she hadn't stopped to think about how she could still make those moments count. "But what if the moments are just too hard?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking a little. "What if I can't find the strength to keep going?" Keanu's voice was steady, comforting. "It's okay to feel like that. We all have those moments. But here's the thing, Emily, you don't have to do it alone. People care about you, and you matter more than you know." For a moment, the world outside the cafe seemed to disappear. The bustling noise of traffic, the chatter of people passing by, everything faded into the background. In that moment, it was just Emily and Keanu, two souls connecting in a way that felt genuine and real. "I never really thought about it that way," Emily said, her voice quiet. "I've spent so much time pushing people away because I didn't want them to see me as weak. But maybe I've been wrong about that." "You're not weak, Emily," Keanu said, his voice unwavering. "You're strong in ways you might not even realize. Just by being here, by talking about this, you're showing more courage than most people ever will." Emily's chest tightened. She could feel the tears welling up, but she held them back. It wasn't just the words he was saying, it was the way he was saying them. Keanu didn't see her as just someone with an illness. He saw her, truly saw her, and in a way, that was the most powerful thing anyone could ever offer. I think I've been waiting for permission to be real," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "To not have to hide behind the walls I've built." Keanu smiled softly, his eyes kind. "You don't need permission from anyone, Emily. You already have everything you need to be real. You just have to trust yourself." The words hung in the air between them, a quiet truth that settled into Emily's heart. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She felt lighter, like she had permission to breathe, to feel, to live. A few moments passed in comfortable silence before Keanu spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "I know this might be difficult, but I want you to think about something. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Life doesn't work like that, but I do believe that even in the hardest of times, there's always a way to find meaning. Maybe it's about leaving something behind, a legacy, a story, a piece of yourself that helps others. You don't have to do it alone." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to be vulnerable. But there, was something about the way Keanu spoke, something about his presence, that made it impossible to hold back. She felt seen, truly seen, in a way that no one had ever made her feel before. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of that," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been so focused on just surviving, I forgot what it was like to really live." "You don't have to figure everything out at once," Keanu replied, his tone comforting. "Start with the small steps. Reach out when you need help. Let people in, even when it's scary. Sometimes, just being open to the possibility of something new is the first step toward healing." Emily nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. For the first time, the future didn't feel so daunting. Maybe it wasn't about conquering the illness or finding a cure. It was about finding meaning in the moments, finding beauty in the smallest things, and allowing herself to experience life fully, no matter how much time she had left. She looked at Keanu, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I never thought I would be having this conversation, but I'm glad I did." Keanu smiled, his eyes kind and understanding. "I'm glad you did too, Emily." The conversation turned lighter as the afternoon wore on, the weight of the earlier discussion now balanced by a sense of peace. They shared stories, laughs, and for a brief moment, Emily felt a connection that went beyond the boundaries of illness, beyond the fear of time running out. She felt like she was just herself. The days after her meeting with Keanu were filled with a quiet sense of transformation. Emily had always been a fighter, but the battle hadn't felt like something she was winning. Now, after the conversation, with him, it felt different. There was a small shift within her, a glimmer of hope that things didn't have to remain the way they were. The time she spent with Keanu had given her something she didn't even realize she had been missing: perspective. She had always focused on what was happening to her, the disease that was taking away pieces of her life, but now she was beginning to see that there was more to life than just survival. Maybe it wasn't about the destination, the final moment, but about how she lived in the meantime. The change wasn't instant, of course, healing never was, but slowly she began to let herself feel the small joys again. The morning sunlight filtering through her window, the warmth of a good cup of coffee, the way the trees swayed in the breeze. They had always been there, but she had stopped noticing. Now she was learning to appreciate them once more. It was a Thursday afternoon when the phone rang. Emily had been lounging on the couch, lost in a book, when the familiar number flashed across the screen. Keanu's name. Her heart skipped a beat as she hesitated before picking up. There was something about his calls that made her both nervous and comforted all at once. "Hey, Emily." His voice came through, calm and warm. "I've been thinking about you. How's everything going?" She smiled, hearing the sincerity in his words. It felt good to hear from him again. "I'm doing all right," she said, stretching out on the couch. "Just taking things one day at a time, you know? But I've been feeling better, in a way. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about making the moments count." Keanu let out a small laugh. "I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of the things we've forgotten. It's easy to get lost in the fight and forget to live. But it sounds like you're finding your way back." "I think I am," Emily agreed. "I think I'm finally starting to let go of the weight I've been carrying around for so long." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a soft sigh that made her realize that he wasn't just speaking from a place of kindness, but from experience. "I know it's not easy," he said after a beat, "but I also know that you're stronger than you think, Emily. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders by yourself." A quiet moment passed between them, the words hanging in the air as if they both understood something deeper than just the surface-level conversation. "Keanu, Emily began, unsure of how to continue. "I wanted to thank you for everything, for listening, for helping me see things differently. It feels like you've given me permission to start living again, and I didn't think that was something I could do anymore." Keanu's voice softened. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. You're the one who's been showing up every day. I just gave you a little push to remember that there's more to this life than just surviving. I'm happy you're finding that out on your own." The Sioux. Sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. It made her feel for the first time like she wasn't just a patient. She was a person, someone worth caring about, someone worth seeing beyond her illness. "Do you think Do you think it's possible to find something good even when everything else is falling apart? She asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. Keanu was quiet for a moment, and Emily couldn't help but wonder if she'd said too much, if she was asking too much of him. But then he answered, his voice thoughtful and full of conviction. I do, he said. I think it's not just possible, it's necessary. Even in our darkest moments, there's always something worth holding on to. And when you start looking for those things, even the smallest ones, they make the rest of the pain a little easier to bear. A weight seemed to lift off of her chest. His words were like a balm, soothing her heart in a way that nothing else had been able to. It wasn't just about her illness anymore. It was about finding the strength to live fully, to embrace whatever time she had left. Keanu, Emily said softly, I don't know if I'm ready for everything you're talking about, but I want to try. I want to try living more, even if it's just one small step at a time. I'm glad to hear that, Emily, Keanu replied, his voice warm with encouragement. And I'll be here every step of the way. You're not alone in this, she smiled, feeling a swell of gratitude. She had gone from feeling isolated, from thinking that she was alone in this fight, to realizing that she didn't have to carry it all by herself. There were people who cared. There were people who saw her, not just as a patient, but as a person. I've been thinking, Keanu continued, his tone shifting slightly. I know this is a big ask, but would you consider doing something for me? Something that might help you even more on this journey? Of course, Emily said, curiosity peaking in her voice. What's the favor? Keanu hesitated for just a moment before speaking. I'm putting together a charity event for the foundation I work with. It's all about helping people in situations like yours, to give them a little hope, a little spark. I'd love for you to be a part of it, not just as a guest, but as someone who shares your story. You've got a voice, Emily, a powerful one, and I think it could really make a difference. Emily's heart raced as she processed his words. She had never thought about sharing her story, let alone publicly. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had been holding on to so much pain, so much fear, and maybe the only way to release it was to let others in. Maybe she could help someone else, just as Keanu had helped her. I'll think about it, Emily said, her voice a little shaky, but filled with possibility. But thank you for believing in me. Keanu smiled on the other end of the line. You don't have to thank me. You already believe in yourself. You just needed someone to remind you. The conversation ended with warm goodbyes, but Emily's heart remained full, her mind racing with the possibility of what lay ahead. Could she really share her story with the world? Could she inspire others in the same way Keanu had inspired her? As she sat in silence after hanging up, Emily realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. The days following her conversation with Keanu were a whirlwind of emotions. Emily had spent countless hours thinking about his words, about how they had given her the courage to think beyond the limitations of her illness. She had always believed that her life had an expiration date, that there was only so much time left before the inevitable came. But now she was beginning to see things differently. Maybe time wasn't what mattered at all. Maybe it was how she spent it. Still, the idea of sharing her story at Keanu's charity event lingered in her mind like a weight on her chest. The thought terrified her. She wasn't someone who sought attention. She wasn't someone who shared her pain with the world. She had always kept her struggles hidden, buried deep inside where no one could see. But now, with Keanu's invitation, the possibility of letting others see her truth felt both liberating and frightening. One afternoon, as Emily sat at her favorite spot by the window, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Keanu. Keanu. Hey, Emily, just wanted to check in and see if you've had any thoughts about the event. No pressure, just wanted to know if you're ready to take the next step. She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to tell him how grateful she was for the opportunity, but she also wanted to back away from the idea entirely. Her fears, her doubts, they crept in and they were hard to ignore. But as she sat there, she thought about how far she had come since they first met. A few weeks ago, She wouldn't have even considered stepping outside of her comfort zone. But now, with Keanu's encouragement and her newfound perspective on life, something had changed. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to use her voice, to share her story and let others know that they weren't alone. With a deep breath, Emily began typing. Emily, I've been thinking about it, and I think I'm ready. I want to be a part of it. I want to share my story. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The weight she had been carrying seemed a little lighter now that she had made a decision. A step forward, however small, was still a step. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of purpose. The response came almost immediately. Keanu, that's amazing, Emily. I knew you had it in you. You're going to do great. Let me know if you need anything. We'll be there to support you. She smiled, a tear escaping her eye, as she read the message. It wasn't just that Keanu believed in her. It was that, for the first time, she was starting to believe in herself. The night of the event arrived faster than Emily had anticipated. She stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, staring at her reflection, trying to steady her racing heart. She had chosen a simple dress, something comfortable yet elegant, but as she looked at herself, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked different, stronger, more confident, more alive. She had always been afraid of public speaking. Even talking to a room full of people had always seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, but tonight was different. She wasn't just speaking about her illness. She was speaking about her journey, her hope, and the people who had helped her along the way. She was speaking for those who felt alone, who didn't know how to take the first step. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the necklace Keanu had given her, the one she now wore as a reminder of the strength she had within her. The necklace had become a symbol of all the courage she was discovering in herself, and tonight she would wear it with pride. As she stepped into the venue, the energy of the crowd immediately engulfed her. The room was filled with people. Some she recognized, others she didn't, but all of them shared one common goal: to raise awareness and funds for those who needed help, just like her. Keanu was already there, of course. He greeted her with a warm smile and a reassuring pat on the back. "You look great, Emily," he said, his voice filled with genuine pride. "Are you ready?" She nodded, her throat dry but her heart steady. "I think so," Keanu smiled, offering her a glass of water. "You've got this. Just speak from the heart. The rest will follow." The event began with speeches from various individuals, philanthropists, doctors, volunteers, but Emily's time came sooner than she expected. Keanu introduced her to the crowd with a few kind words, but Emily could hardly hear him over the pounding of her own heartbeat. She stepped up to the podium, her hands gripping the sides for support, and looked out at the sea of faces before her. Her mouth went dry as she stared at the audience, but then she remembered what Keanu had told her. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be real. She cleared her throat and began, "Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm here tonight because I believe in the power of hope. I believe in the power of connection, of sharing our stories, and of helping each other find strength. When we think we have none left." Her voice shook at first, but the more she spoke, the stronger it became. She told them about her journey, about the diagnosis, the fear, the moments when she thought she couldn't keep going. But she also spoke about the people who had helped her, about Keanu, about the kindness she had found in unexpected places, and about how she was learning to live again, one moment at a time. "I'm not here to talk about how sick I am," she said, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I'm here to talk about how important it is to be kind, to be open, to let others in when you're struggling. I'm here because even when everything feels like it's falling apart, we can still find beauty, we can still find purpose, and we can still find a way to make the most of the time we have left." The room was silent, but Emily felt the connection. Between her and the audience, felt the weight of their collective energy supporting her. She wasn't just speaking to them. She was speaking with them, sharing her heart and her truth in a way she never had before. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness, and then the applause began, soft at first, but building into a powerful wave of support. Emily's chest swelled with emotion, and for the first time in a long time she allowed herself to fully experience it. She let herself feel the love, the support, the warmth that was pouring toward her. And it felt incredible. As she stepped off the stage, Keanu was waiting for her, his eyes filled with admiration. "You did it," he said, a proud smile on his face. "I knew you could." Emily could barely speak, her throat tight with emotion, but as she met his gaze, she realized something. This wasn't just about sharing her story. This was about embracing who she was without fear, without hesitation. It was about finding the courage to live in the face of uncertainty. And for the first time, she truly believed she could. After the event, Emily was overwhelmed by the response. She had expected to feel a sense of relief, but the impact was much deeper than that. The applause was still ringing in her ears, and the faces of the people who had come to her afterward with kind words and gratitude were etched in her memory. She hadn't just shared her story that night. She had ignited something in others, something she didn't even know was possible. Keanu had been right. Her voice mattered, and it had resonated with people. They came to her with their own struggles, their own stories, some of them even more painful than hers. Emily found herself listening, offering comfort, and finding a surprising sense of peace in knowing that she wasn't alone in her journey. Others, too, were struggling. Others, too, needed to be reminded that life was about more than just surviving. It was about finding meaning and purpose, no matter how small. As the days passed, the gratitude and admiration kept coming. Messages flooded her inbox, and her social media was filled with comments from people who had watched her speak that night. Some had faced illness, some had faced loss, but all had found something in her words that gave them hope. Some even said they'd been inspired to share their own stories, to speak out, to embrace the love and connection that Emily had so boldly claimed. It was humbling. It was also empowering. One afternoon, as Emily sat at the kitchen table, reading through a few of the messages, she felt a familiar buzz in her pocket. It was a message from Keanu. "Keanu, hey Emily, how are you holding up? I know it's been a lot lately, but I just wanted to check in. You did an incredible job at the event. I'm proud of you." She smiled, a warmth spreading through her. Keanu had always been there for her, always encouraging her to go further, to believe in herself. She had never imagined someone like him could have such an impact on her life. But now she understood. He hadn't just given her a platform. He had given her a new way of seeing herself. "Emily, thank you, Keanu. It's been incredible, honestly. I never imagined it would have this kind of impact. I feel like I'm finally starting to find my purpose again." Her phone buzzed again, and she opened his response. "Keanu, I'm so glad to hear that. You've got a lot to offer the world, Emily, and I think this is just the beginning for you." Emily sat back in her chair, reflecting on his words. She had started this journey, feeling lost, as though her life was defined by what she was losing. But now it felt like she was gaining something deeper than she had ever imagined. That evening she called her mum, who had been a constant support throughout this entire process. Emily's voice shook as she spoke. "Mom, I can't believe how much everything has changed. It's like I don't even recognize myself sometimes. I'm not just talking about the illness anymore. I'm talking about how I feel, how I'm thinking. I feel like I'm becoming the person I've always wanted to be." Her mum's voice crackled with emotion on the other end of the line. "I'm so proud of you, Emily. You've always been strong, but now I see that strength in a way I never have before. You've found your voice, and it's beautiful." Emily's heart swelled with love for her mother, for the unwavering support she had always given her. It felt good to know that the people who loved her saw the changes too, that they could see the shift in her spirit, in the way she now approached life. Later that evening, as Emily sat by the window watching the sunset, she thought back to that first conversation with Keanu, how he had reminded her that life wasn't about just surviving, it was about living with purpose. And now she was starting to understand what that meant. Her phone rang again, and this time it was a call from a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Emily, this is Lisa from the charity event. We spoke briefly that night." I just wanted to say thank you again for sharing your story. It's been a week since the event, and we've received more donations than we could have ever imagined. Your story touched so many people, and I wanted to personally invite you to speak at another event we're organizing next month. It's all about inspiring others to keep going, even when the odds are against them. We would be honored to have you share your experience again. Emily's heart raced. She hadn't expected anything like this. It was one thing to speak at the first event, but now the idea of speaking again, of continuing to share her journey, it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I don't know what to say, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything yet, Lisa reassured her. Just think about it. We believe in the impact you can have, and we think your story is exactly what people need to hear right now. As Emily sat there processing the offer, she realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the people who needed to hear her words, the people who were struggling in silence, the people who didn't know that. There was a way forward. It was about making sure they knew they weren't alone. Okay, she said, the words slipping out more easily than she expected. I'll do it. I'll speak again. A wave of emotion washed over her, but it wasn't fear this time. It was a sense of purpose, a feeling that this was what she was meant to do. She wasn't just sharing her story for herself. She was sharing it for everyone who needed hope, who needed to believe that it was possible to find light in the darkest of times. The morning after the call from Lisa, Emily woke up with a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. The events of the past few weeks had been a whirlwind, each moment leading her closer to something bigger than herself. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving, learning, growing, and sharing the lessons she had learned along the way. The next event was only a month away, and Emily was already preparing. Her apartment was filled with notebooks, pages covered in thoughts, ideas, and memories she wanted to share. Every word she wrote felt like another step forward. She wasn't just writing for an audience, she was writing for herself, reclaiming the pieces of herself that had been lost in the struggle. As the days went by, she continued to hear from people who had been touched by her story. Some had reached out through social media, while others had sent personal messages or notes of gratitude. Emily's story had ignited something in them. They were finding their own strength, their own courage to keep going. It was more than she could have ever hoped for. One afternoon, as Emily was working on her speech, she received a text from Keanu. Keanu, just wanted to remind you, you're doing something incredible. I'm proud of you, and I know everyone who hears you speak will be too. Emily smiled, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. She had never imagined that something as simple as a few words of encouragement could have such an impact. But every message, every moment of support had been a building block, giving her the confidence she needed to continue her journey. The night of the second event arrived, and Emily stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was buzzing with energy, filled with people eager to hear the stories of resilience, courage, and hope. She could feel the nervousness in her bones, but she also felt something else, a quiet strength that had been building inside her for weeks. This wasn't just about telling her story anymore. It was about showing others that no matter how dark life might get, there was always a way forward. Keanu found her just before she was called to the stage. He gave her a warm, reassuring smile. You ready? Emily nodded, her palms sweaty but her heart steady. I think so. You're going to do great, Keanu said. Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being real. People will connect with you because you're being yourself. Emily took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding her for a moment, but then she saw the faces in the audience. She saw the people who were there, listening, waiting. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but as the words flowed, the nerves began to fade. She shared her story, about the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, but also about the love and the hope that had carried her through. She spoke about the lessons she had learned, the importance of connection, and the power of vulnerability. I've learned that life isn't about waiting for things to get better, Emily said, her eyes scanning the audience. It's about finding the strength to keep going, even when everything feels impossible. It's about embracing the small moments, the connections we make and the love we give to each other. And it's about realizing that even when we're at our lowest, we still have something to offer. As she spoke, she saw the faces in the crowd softening, the connection deepening. She wasn't just telling them about her journey. She was inviting them to be a part of it, to share in the hope, the love, and the strength that had carried her this far. When Emily finished, the room was silent for a moment. And then the applause began. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a standing ovation. Emily stood there, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and gratitude. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction, but as the cheers continued, she realized that it wasn't about the applause. It was about the connections she had made, the lives she had touched, and the difference she had made in the world. Backstage, Keanu was waiting for her, his face beaming with pride. "You were amazing," he said, his voice full of admiration. Emily's eyes were bright with emotion. "I never thought I'd be able to do this, but now I feel like I've found my purpose." "You've always had it within you," Keanu said, his voice soft. "You just needed to believe it." As they walked out of the event together, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had come so far in such a short time. Her fears, her doubts, her struggles had all been part of her journey. But now they were no longer holding her back. She was ready for whatever came next. She had found her voice. She had found her strength. And most importantly, she had found a community of people who believed in her and her message. It wasn't just about fighting her illness anymore. It was about living fully, embracing every moment, and sharing the love that had carried her through the hardest of times. It was about offering hope to others, showing them that they too had the strength to keep going. As she looked out over the city, the lights twinkling in the distance, she realized that her journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one lesson you've learned from a challenging time in your life?